welcome. My name is Palma Accardi, and you are watching Tidal Flooding Talk here at the Irish Pub in Atlantic City, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition.
I'm meteorologist Dan Skeldon. Thanks for joining us on this Sunday. Couple weeks left of South Jersey summer, right? Labor Day coming up pretty quickly. We appreciate you joining us every Sunday night, 7 p.m. Always try to bring you a different guest, and we have a first-time guest, and really someone I've had the pleasure of working with in the past. I have a lot of respect for. One of the best in the business, meteorologist, former National Weather Service meteorologist. I hate to call him former because he's still very active. Gary Szatkowski. Gary, appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here, Dan. Thank you.
Gary comes, maybe one of the farthest traveled guests, come up from along the Delaware River in Burlington County, right?
Yeah, it wasn't bad. It was about an hour and 20 minutes to get here, so not too bad.
Well, hopefully we make it worth your while. Appreciate you being here along the shore. You can field your questions to Gary online. Otherwise, Palm and I will steer the discussion. And let's just start off by having Gary tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I'm a retired meteorologist now for the National Weather Service. So I retired actually a little over 3 years ago. And before that, I spent a little over 35 years with the National Weather Service. The biggest portion of that career, the last 21 years, was as the meteorologist in charge at the National Weather Service office in Mount Holly. So a lot of my experience was here locally. And before that, I moved around to different places with the Weather Service. I was down in the Washington, D.C. area and worked a couple different jobs there. Before that, I was in Oklahoma City, where I learned a lot about tornadoes. And my first duty station for the Weather Service was San Juan, Puerto Rico, where I learned about hurricanes. So I picked up quite a bit of stuff along the way, and then it was very useful when I came here to New Jersey and then built upon it with the experience here.
Where we get hurricanes, we get tornadoes, maybe not to the degree of those other places, but we get a little bit of everything here.
This year, tornadoes are like hot this year.
Right.
I mean, Mount Laurel has gotten hit twice this year. I don't know. I can't even tell you when that last time that happened. So yeah, we've had tornadoes, not as much as the Midwest, but yeah, and then certainly we've had threats from hurricanes.
Right.
Now, I think there's a common trend with meteorologists as to about what age you decided to become interested in meteorology.
Yeah.
What about you?
Very young, very young. Or I'm old enough to remember when there were afternoon newspapers, not just morning newspapers, but afternoon newspapers. And one of my earliest memories is coming home from school. The afternoon newspaper would arrive, and I would open up to the weather page. My mom tells me I was like 4 or 5 years old when I was doing that. So I mean, I'm really young. Obviously, if I go into school, so probably 5.
Now,
5
does
or
that
6.
beat you, I think?
Yeah, I was 9, so
Okay.
Gary was in it long before me. I was 9 years old with Hurricane Gloria. You were
Okay.
4 or 5. What was the newspaper?
Chicago Daily News.
Okay.
Chicago. So
Yeah.
how would you compare the weather in Chicago? Like, what makes New Jersey's weather unique since you grew up somewhere else?
Right. Well, Chicago is obviously in the middle of the country. It's next to Lake Michigan, so it does get some influence. There's like a lake breeze there that's like this, has some similarities to the sea breeze here. But it's a much more continental climate, to use kind of weather climatology terms. And so you have warmer summers and colder winters. New Jersey tends not to be quite as extreme on either end as, say, someplace in the middle of the country that might be kind of even, with it going east and west. So the flip side here is you get a lot more variety of weather. I mean, it was pretty much, you get blizzards, and then you'd get, heavy rains in the summertime in the Chicago area. But here, you get, there's nor'easters, there's hurricanes, there's, much more interesting storms, winter storms, because if you're in the Chicago area, a lot of it would tend to be snow. It was going to be snow, kind of with snow over the whole area. Here, there's this constant battle between the shore and then across the Delaware, up to the Lehigh Valley and the Poconos. Where's the rain-snow line going to set up? And there's, it can be critical. A 5 or 10 mile difference can really matter. So those kinds of things are, some of the things that make New Jersey unique is the wide variety over a relatively small area, going from the Poconos to the shore is only several hours drive, and a lot of people live there, so it can affect a lot. Bad weather can affect a lot of people, and if you don't get the forecast right, you hear about it because it is the the error in the forecast affects a lot of people because there's just so many who live around here.
One of the best forecasts you guys made, you made a lot of good forecasts, was Hurricane Sandy. All right, I just remember from being down here, derecho, that's one of the things I wish, we could have saw a little bit better, the severity of that. Sandy, perhaps one of the best forecasts. The Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, the products you guys put out were fantastic. And we use Sandy a lot on this show as the defining storm. I want to talk a little bit about, the process that went into, developing your forecast for Sandy, realizing how bad it was going to be, and communicating that message to the people along the shore.
Sure. Well, obviously that was sort of like a benchmark event for the people who live here. It was kind of a benchmark event for myself and a lot of the staff at the Mount Holly National Weather Service offices. That's really the biggest event that's impacted the region for a long period of time. We started to work, and actually, by the time of Sandy, I was on social media. I learned after Irene, which was the year before Sandy, that we were missing some information that was available. And I kind of, for whatever reason, I gravitated toward Twitter. So, and actually, Kathy Orr, who's now with Fox in Philadelphia, hi Kathy, taught me. She came to the office one day to visit, and she taught me how to use Twitter. She said, "Oh, it's so easy," and she did this, and then all of a sudden I'm using Twitter. And this is after Irene, before Sandy. So, by the time of Sandy, we were looking at social media. I was using it to take the pulse of what was going on among the general population, or at least the ones that are on Twitter, besides all the other stuff we would look at, all the scientific stuff. And, I could see that people were starting to get a little anxious about the storm a week out. And so we started to look at, one of the things we do was briefing packages, put together these information packages, and that was relatively new still when we were doing Sandy. That had only been going for a couple of years. And again, a very popular thing, not every weather office was doing it. And so I remember I walked in, it was maybe it was like 8 days before Sandy, and I said, "Is it time to put together the first briefing package? Because, are you guys getting questions from emergency managers? Is the phone starting to light up?" Because I'm seeing discussion on social media, and they were like, "Let's wait another 24 hours and see what happens." And so we did, and so now it's 7 days out, and they're like, "Yeah, go for it." And so that was the longest by far. I think previously maybe we talked about a hurricane 4 or maybe 5 days in advance, but starting 7 days in advance, I mean, that's out. The Hurricane Center track only goes out 5 days. Right. So we were really kind of stretching, and then we started talking about it. It just kept getting worse and worse, more ominous looking, and we put some, appropriate language in there as it got closer. Then I did something that was really outside the box, the personal plea in the briefing package. I surprised my staff doing that, and that was the day before.
You kind of made national. That created some national in a good way because it communicated the severity in an outside the box way that I think people connected with.
Yeah, I was going to say, all of a sudden in this slide, I kind of stepped, step out from behind the camera, behind wherever you think I am, and I'm talking to you like we're having a conversation here, and I'm telling you it's going to be really bad, and you really need to, you really need to be thinking about leaving if you're in these, areas, and I used some, kind of dramatic language, just, there was no National Weather Service is a federal agency, so it's big on policy. There's no policy for this. I really stepped off the ranch, to do this. And I surprised my staff by doing it. I didn't show it to them. Normally they review. I put together a briefing package. They review it before it goes out. I slipped that slide in. I apologized to them later. I said, before I really knew how it was all going to play out, I just said, if this turns out to be a really bad idea, your boss is the only one going down on this. If it's a great idea, we can all share, the positive. But because it was so different to do that, and obviously Sandy turned out to be really, really bad. So putting that type of language in there and behaving that way turned out to be very positive. We got a lot of feedback from it in a positive way. So. And then Sandy hits, and we're just, and again, you're hoping we've done everything we can possibly do. Again, I was kind of, the staff at, a day or two before, it was clear that this thing was not going to miss us. We were kind of like, I said, we know what the bullseye on the center of the dartboard looks like, because this thing it was something that would wiggle a little this way, then it would come back, I said, we're it. And so the staff saying, what else should we do? Because I'm the boss, I'm in charge. And I said, this is like a sports game. We want to use like a football game, and people just sometimes they hold up 4, meaning they're going to play all 4 quarters. They're going to leave. I said, just leave everything out on the field. That whatever happens after this, that you don't feel the next day or the next week, gee, I wish I would have done da-da. You know, do it. You know, put that extra information out there, make that extra phone call, or, you know, get on a briefing call and provide that extra information. And so the staff, you know, they stepped up and did that, and it worked out really well in terms of at least telling people what was going to happen. I tell people I would have wished it would have been a terrible thing to have to explain how we were wrong, but I would have wished Sandy would have missed us. I would have my last part of my career would have been apologizing for the terrible Sandy forecast, but that didn't happen. We got creamed, and it was really like I said, it's a benchmark event for my career. I've seen some bad weather, but that was the worst. Yep.
Well, in that instance, it was definitely important to communicate the severity of the storm.
Yeah.
However, for other weather events, how do you control not overhyping a storm?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of information that's out there, and the Weather Service, I would say, tends to be, you know, if I was going to kind of describe its behavior, it tends to be a conservative organization. There tends to be, I think you'll get sometimes, there's other parts, you know, we call it the weather enterprise, and so that can be broadcast media, TV and radio, internet. There's the public sector, the National Weather Service. There's private sector companies like AccuWeather, Weather Channel, etc. And there's academia. And you can get, typically, a little more colorful, or someone might go a little, you know, more dramatic on something.
Where every storm is Sandy, or every thunderstorm is a
and certainly on social
Right,
media, on Twitter, you can find that with every storm. But yeah, so we kind of have a built-in mechanism in the National Weather Service where we tell you what's going to happen, but at the same time, and we try to talk about the impacts. You know, so we'll say, well, this could happen. This could produce moderate coastal flooding. And I think most people here along, you know, in Atlantic City, along the Jersey Shore, they know what moderate coastal flooding is. It'll be easy enough for them to find out. And those terms are actually defined, and where there's tide gauges, we actually have a certain number. If it hits this number or higher, it's moderate coastal flooding. And so people learn that real quick if they're, say, relatively new to the area. You know, I think probably the people who we worry about the most who don't know that kind of stuff are this time of year vacationers. People come in from other parts of the country where they don't worry. You know, sometimes I think they're surprised to discover that there's tides. You know, the ocean by itself goes up and down, let alone weather-related stuff. So you know, they're probably not going to know what moderate coastal flooding is. You know, but a lot of people, you know, so the Weather Service kind of keeps things. You know, if there's going to be bad weather, we'll put out like a severe thunderstorm. You know, in the wintertime. You know, winter storm watch or warning with snowfall amounts. And we feel bad if the numbers are wrong, high or low. We don't want to hype it, and we don't want to miss it by a wide margin. There's always some uncertainty, you know, but that's not a cop-out, that's just a recognition, you know, that there's some uncertainty in the forecasting. But on average, I mean, the other thing we do with Weather Service, we verify our forecasts, we verify our warnings in particular, and the numbers. And we look for biases. You know, do we forecast temperatures too warm in the summertime? You know, do we forecast too much snow? And so we have, you know, workshops, seminars, we do research, and we get better, you know, by kind of self-correcting. So.
What can we do better? This is another popular question I like to ask guests as well. We had Irene, all right, and Irene along the Jersey Shore turned out less severe than thought, which is a good thing, you know.
Right.
Maybe not from a forecasting perspective, but for a life perspective, for a property damage, you know, we kind of lucked out with Sandy. It was worse to our south over North Carolina. It was worse to our north over Vermont. It was worse to our west in Pennsylvania. Then comes Sandy. Sandy was, you know, a nailed forecast. I mean, it was such a well forecast storm. Yet living along the shore, even though the forecast for Sandy was spot on, people will say, Irene wasn't bad. I didn't think Sandy was going to be that bad. So you kind of, as a meteorologist, as an emergency manager, you're always fighting the human nature of thinking, the next storm's going to be like the last one.
Right.
How do you correct that? Like what can meteorologists, the National Weather Service, or what do you recommend people do to not get caught off guard by that? Because it is human nature. Like after the derecho, everyone thought the next thunderstorm was going to be a derecho.
Yeah.
You know, it's just the next one's going to be like the last one. So how do we fix that?
Well, by talking about it just like you did, to just acknowledge that that's part of human nature, and the point of all these forecasts and warnings, wherever they're coming from, whoever's putting them out, is to serve the general public or help the population that you're serving. I mean, the point of it, we're not like in a little research box where we're, just creating these forecasts to see how they verify, and that we're not concerned about the impacts. I think the Weather Service has gotten more concerned about the impacts over the arc of my career, and so now there's a lot more focus on the type of language you use, not to get swept up in the science, but to use language that members of the general population, general public can understand, and relate to, and then describe some, localized impacts that they might be familiar with. I mean, that's one way. When I did the personal plea, we could see that people were kind of thinking Sandy was going to be Irene round 2,
Right.
and that was a bad call, and so that was part of it too. So behaving differently is another way to do it.
Now, has that personal plea? Obviously, that's not a regular National Weather Service
No.
product. Has that caught on at all in Mount Holly since you left, or like is any other Weather Service official thinking outside the box like that and doing something off the cuff to connect a little more?
Yeah, I think there's a general movement in that direction. I don't know that there's anything like a parallel to the personal plea that I could point to, but I do know there's a lot more introduction. It's called impact-based decision support services is like the buzz phrase when I left, and that was just the idea that, again, you're forecasting all this weather, but what does it mean and how does it affect people? So, for example, to step away from hurricanes for a second, like a winter storm. There's 6 inches of snow, and there's 6 inches of snow. The 6 inches of snow that's really bad is the one that hits on the Thursday or Friday evening rush hour. It starts like an hour or two before, and it comes down. Even if it's only 6 inches, it comes down over an inch an hour. And it's just as people are getting off of work, they get on the roads turn icy. Even if the salt trucks are out there, all of a sudden they're gridlocked along with everyone else. 6 inches of snow that falls like midnight, Saturday night, Sunday morning, that's, some folks might be late, getting to church in the morning, but that's about it, and the road crews will clear the roads, during the early morning hours before most people are even out. And so that there's this realization now that we can tell, we know that, and we kind of know the impacts, but a lot of people don't think that through, so, and I'm not being critical of that. It's our job to think that through and then tell them about it. So we're much more sensitive now to not just 6 inches of snow or there's going to be major coastal flooding, but when it's going to occur, how, if it's going to affect, if it's coastal flooding, how many high tides it's going to occur, cover, how's that going to affect, what days of the week it is that going to affect, if it's this time of year, if it's the weekend when, properties are swapping, people are, there's going to be a lot of traffic moving around, so we're more thoughtful on that now than I think ever before, and I think that's a follow-on to, say, the personal plea.
Okay.
Now, what is the process in order for a state of emergency to be declared? Like, is there like a step-by-step thing, or is it case-by-case? What would make that happen?
Yeah, and the state of emergency is something the government does, typically the state government. And so, and if it's weather-related, obviously we're providing them weather information, but the National Weather Service would not make that call. We would sometimes could tell from the questions they were asking on a briefing call that they're getting worried and they might be thinking about something like that. But that would be, and so a state of emergency. I mean, now and again over the arc of my career, in the beginning you never saw a state of emergency declared before the first snowflake or the first drop of rain or the first, before, say, a hurricane had actually arrived. And now you see these states of emergency declared, before any of that happens. That's a real compliment, when some people make the tiresome joke about, I wish I could have a job where I could be wrong, blah, 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 you never saw that 35 years ago. Now you see, these states of emergency, which basically allows government to mobilize its resources and its, both in terms of staffing and equipment. And also in utility companies, they pre-position stuff. I mean, airlines, if it's a winter storm or a hurricane, they fly equipment out. You didn't see any of that 35 years ago. Where there's, if you go back, you see these pictures of like, airplanes, buried in snowdrifts and stuff like that at the airport. But now, I mean, you can still find that every once in a while now. But now the airlines fly the planes out, and the government going back to a state of emergency, they'll call it, they'll mobilize, they'll get it for the coastal flooding thing, they'll get, they have certain high water vehicles, and they'll make sure they're available, stage them where they'll be safe, and then, get them ready to go in to where they need to go in based on the forecast, and then based on them what actually happens. So the Weather Service provides a lot of input into that, weather-related input into that decision. It's the governor, or with recommendations from senior staff that would make the call.
To touch on something you talked about earlier, a lot of our tidal flooding along the shore, the coastal flood warnings, come from nor'easters and winter storms, but it can happen in the summer and fall. A lot of tourists have no idea what a coastal flood warning versus advisory is,
Right.
What moderate flooding would be, where I should drive my car. How can meteorologists help that at all? Help the understanding of something that's foreign to people who are on vacation. It's no fault of their own. They don't know what coastal flooding is. It's just, they're not from the area. Whether it be a hurricane or just a tidal event or, an early season nor'easter. Anything we can do there to help the understanding of this.
Well, broadly, throughout the weather community, I think is to keep that in mind and maybe have online references, with your TV station or with your agency or, for coastal flooding terms. You see a lot of stuff posted regarding rip currents, and that's to help people who are not familiar with that. There can be a lot of stuff on the internet that basically explains what coastal flooding is very, very briefly and how things to look for, coastal flood warning, what does that mean, et cetera. How do you find things out? And the other thing is the National Weather Service has a program called Weather Ready Nation, and so communities, townships, boroughs, cities can become weather ready, and that means that they go through a process and they have available in their jurisdiction whatever the hazard might be, whether it's snowstorms, coastal flooding, they have those materials available. And in some cases, they're handing them out with rental brochure information, or they're easily posted. They're posted where they can be easily accessed. So.
Now, you mentioned you were very active on Twitter to get your report across. How else do you think that social media has influenced the weather community, and is it more in a positive or a negative way?
I think it's more positive than negative, but there's a lot of both. We've seen with the negative aspect, we see a lot of people now. You see it not just in meteorology, but other things. Everyone's now an expert on something because they read an article, somewhere on Wikipedia or something, and now they know as much as either a medical doctor, or they know as much, as a politician, or they know as much as a meteorologist. And so that we have that problem, just like you can find it elsewhere. Particularly on Twitter, I'm most familiar with Twitter, so I'll just say that's probably what I'm kind of referencing, but I think you'll find that on social media in general. The positive aspect is that it gives people, on my Twitter account, I'll get people, who can ask me questions that I could never even hear about or answer, or highly unlikely to hear about or answer. Just a couple days ago, we had, some storms around, and someone was looking at the radar and they wanted to know what's that little circular thing right in the center, of the map. And so I'm serious, but it's not. I'm not being goofy. But what is that? And I'm like, oh, it's that's where the radar is. That's the Doppler radar. It makes that little, very tiny little circle, little hole in the echoes, literally, and then everything else you see around it is what it's detecting. But that's where the radar's at, and you can see that everywhere you go with any Doppler radar. And they're like, oh, thank you. And it's just little stuff like that. That's happened probably thousands of times over the last 5, 6, 7 years.
It's something you can't do when you're the man behind the curtain at the Weather Service.
No, that's right. We would get phone calls and people would ask questions, but just the volume with social media, with Twitter, is just far greater. And so I think it really helped for those who are weather enthusiasts, those who have just kind of a gentle interest in the weather but want to know a little bit more. It's a great way to help.
Now, how can someone determine whether or not someone is a reliable source for weather?
It almost comes from experience. When I'm on Twitter, one of the things people asking stuff, I say, for this time of year for hurricanes, every home, every business should have a hurricane plan. And every home, every business should have a trusted weather source, one or more. You can have more than one trusted weather source. And how do you develop a trusted weather source? It's from experience. You have to go and look at weather information. You find one or two, or if you want more, you can keep looking. But sources that you find reliable and also that communicate in a way that you find effective. So, broadcast meteorologists have different styles. Not every TV meteorologist is the same. Some styles might be, a person might be more comfortable with one style versus the other. You can use National Weather Service, you can use private sector companies, you can use there's even enthusiasts that are really good at explaining stuff in plain language. So the idea is find one or two trusted weather sources, and that just takes time. There's no other good way to go about it. There's no one's making an official list. So.
And I alluded to when I introduced you. I mean, I think you are one of the most trusted sources that I rely on for weather information. How do people follow you on Twitter? Because obviously your last name is a little challenging.
Right, I was going to say.
So how do we find you on Twitter?
I was going to say, I made it as simple as I could. Well, maybe I didn't, but it's based on my name. So it's just the @ symbol, then Gary, Gary, then Szatkowski. That's S, Z as in zebra, A, T as in Tom, Kowski.
Which should be in the description of this.
It is. The correct spelling is in the intro.
So if you just use my name with the symbol in front, you'll find me on Twitter.
So you are retired from the Weather Service, but you're still pretty active on Twitter these days, right? And it's a medium you communicate very effectively over. And so you're still very active on Twitter. And I think people following you, you inform, but you also educate a little bit too, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, I sometimes can be, I'm not everyone's cup of tea, because sometimes if I don't think someone's done their homework, they kind of know that they're not getting a passing grade from, they're like, I didn't even know I was being graded. I said, well, now you do. So, I do expect people to kind of have done some research or explain something, to go, you can Google it, you can Wikipedia it, and then if you have some follow-on questions, that's great. But yeah, on Twitter, I get a lot of questions just about stuff, and otherwise I just point people to things, and I try to always focus on the weather impact of the day. The Weather Service is not a criticism, but they just put out a steady stream of information, and then they add on to it with warnings and stuff as needed. But it's easy to get kind of overwhelmed with everything that's coming out. So like if I think heat's the big problem, like around this time of year, I'll focus you on a heat index forecast for tomorrow or the next day that maybe you weren't looking at yet, but you'd want to. And if it's a hurricane, obviously, I'll be starting to talk about you need a hurricane plan and trusted weather sources, like what I would tell you 5 days out, and as it gets closer, we'll talk more.
So do you post on Twitter every day, sort of like a highlight of the weather, or multiple times a week?
I try to. I try to touch it daily. So I'm not perfect at that sometimes. Sometimes there's other things going on, but I'm usually on there daily.
All right. We're talking with Gary Szatkowski, meteorologist, former meteorologist in charge of the National Weather Service, Mount Holly, Twitter aficionado, and a great source of weather information. Appreciate you making the trip down to the Irish pub.
Excellent.
We're going to partake in a little pub fare after the show.
Sounds good.
All right, Gary, appreciate you being here.
Very good.
As you partake, you could wear your new Irish pub t-shirt.
All right.
Thank you for joining us.
All right.
Are there any last-minute questions?
Actually, just a couple, which I've ignored. Let's see. Number
you didn't
one
ignore it. You
was,
didn't see them.
Does the National Weather Service still recruit spotters, storm spotters for tornadoes and that?
And the answer is yes. They have a Skywarn program. You can go on the Weather Service website. If you're in the local area, you want to go to the Mount Holly office website and look for Skywarn. It's like an acronym, SKYWARN. And that's the program where you can attend training, or now sometimes just do it online. You don't even have to physically travel. And then you can become a Skywarn spotter. You get an ID, how cool. And then you can report in, and you use your ID that tells them where you're at.
Yep. You can report floods, severe weather,
tornado,
anything, hail,
whatever significant is going on.
All right. When does the heat end? That would be later this week, right?
Later this week, and my Twitter commentary sometime would be October.
No.
And Sandy says, if it hasn't rained, how can it flood? That's ultimately tide, wind, and just living along the shore, right?
I was going to
say,
say,
it's a fact of life.
If you vacation down here, last time I was down here, we were vacationing in Ocean City. It was a sunny day, and the water came up through the drains, and onto the streets. It was a higher than normal high tide, mostly just because of the sun and the moon. There's a little weather involved, but yeah, it can get wet.
That's all it takes. All right, so Tidal Flooding Talk every Sunday at 7 p.m., but not next Sunday at 7 p.m. I'm on vacation. I'm up in the New Hampshire mountains. I'm going to bring some cool weather back down for everybody, ideally. I am. So next Sunday will be off, but we should have a show for you Labor Day weekend on that Sunday, tentatively as of right now. And all through September, have some great guests lined up. Talking with Gary Szatkowski tonight. Gary, again, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
We'll see you guys back
Great
here in 2 weeks.